sick and she wouldn't be able to join us. She's with us, actually, in her heart, but her condition doesn't allow her to speak up, so we open the seminar without her, but she's with us. I greet all of you and I thank you for coming here, for being with us. We understand that this is a working time and you pay your tickets, and that's not too simple. And well, it's good that the house is full. You all have your programs, and there is a brief description of the project here. Some of you know something about it, some of you don't. Um, Fine? Can you hear me? No. It's no, it's fine. Okay. So this project is meant to attract people who are actively involved in the process of socialization of young people who work at schools, at the house of creative activity, libraries, and anybody who is interested in civic education. Civic education, civil upbringing, doesn't matter how you call it, but the civil values are important for these people. And we invite such people here, and we develop their potential as experts. We try to help them in expert and methodological ways, and well, we develop people who, well, think along the same lines with us. There are 4 experimental regions which are involved in this project, which is Rostov Oblast, Stavropolsky Krai, Yaroslav Oblast, and Volgograd Oblast. And this project has been going on for 2 years. Seminars are held of different type, like round tables on regional or on federal level. This is, by the way, the second federal seminar. There were seminars in Budapest, in Berlin, and we also deal with specific social initiatives. After such seminars, schools and universities which are involved in this experiment develop and implement their own projects. They offer the projects themselves on the basis of their capacities, and we support there with expert and methodological assistance. The projects are quite different, and regions are different, and we promote projects in a different way. We we attract different actors. But the thing is to build a community and to establish partnership relationships between schools and libraries, NGOs, cultural institutions of different nature. By the way, behind you see comics, and we have here representatives of Goethe Center. We have here Anna Varankova and Marina Belaeva, who is going to join us later. The civil values are to be developed and promoted through visual arts, through culture, and through all possible ways for children to be interested, and we have to invent something unusual. And we've been engaged in this kind of activity for the last couple of years. We are assisted by the European Center of Wergeland. This is a Norwegian organization, resource center of education. That's the daughter of the Council of Europe, and it supports cultural initiatives. And all the projects which are aimed at intercultural activities, support of democratic legal culture and civil society, and this support is very important to us. We have Lars Gudmundsen here. He is Deputy Executive Director of the Vigeland Center. Now, A few words about the seminar itself. You are not newcomers here because last year we held similar seminar in Pokrovskoye. It was Moscow Oblast. Some of you were there also. There were 60 participants last year, and we decided that we had to go on with this work. Now we have 80 participants. That means that we have increased, and our geography has increased dramatically, both to the west and to the east. We have a participant from Austria. Khalil, where are you? And we have a participant from Kyrgyzia. It's really very interesting. We've been talking about civil education in Russia regions, but all the issues are to be considered not only inside your own geography, but you have to look out. And our seminar is called Civil Education in the Modern World. So it's not only Russia, but you know that in the program, the majority of experts are from Russia. And we expected larger European participation, but unfortunately one of the key experts of this seminar, Rolf Golub, has not received visa because his passport is a little bit, well, outdated. Of course, it's not very helpful, but whatever we try to do, we shall be able to implement. We'll talk about the civil education, about its priorities, values, criteria of quality. And we have Russian European representatives here, and we shall consider European experience. Marzena Rafalska and Magdalena Pshivor are present, and Jeffrey Hosking is going to join us later today. That's another heroic deed, because people come for 1 or 2 sessions just to work with you. So this work will be useful for everybody. It's mostly presentation of experts for 20 or 30 minutes, and then a discussion. You also have many interactive sessions, working in groups, all sorts of exercises. And our participants in these seminars write that they are interested in more applied issues, and we try to take it into consideration. But for us, the discussion is very important about the fundamental problems in the area. So it's not only practice, but if you are involved in the project actively, if we discuss possible cooperation, then specific methodology would be covered in a larger extent, working with trainers, with coaches, and so on. It's not only that we want to give you something, we are interested in your feedback, because there are many people around here who deal with civil education in the regions. And it's not only about 4 regions which I mentioned. Actually, all Russian regions do something in this sphere. And in the final session, we ask you to present your experience in the frame of the topic. And some of you have already pushed forward the initiative in this regard. So we are expecting your moves, your initiatives, because this project is much more than just seminars. Some other cooperation is also possible, and we want to find common ground with you, meaning where we can be of use to each other. Now it's Lars Gudmundsen, our partner, who will tell you about Vigilance Center. Lars, welcome.
Thank you, Anastasia. Always a pleasure to be here. Dear friends, First of all, good morning. On behalf of the European Wergeland Center and the Council of Europe, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this seminar on civic education in the modern world. I see quite a few familiar faces here, and it's great to see you all again. But it's also encouraging to see that there are so many new participants. Because as you know, and as Anastasia said, this seminar is part of a bigger program, the promotion of civic education in Russian regions, which the European Wergeland Center organized in partnership with the Moscow School of Civic Education, with the generous support of the Council of Europe and the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the program is now in its third year, and there are some very impressive results. And one thing, of course, is the training that you take part in as participants in these seminars, and we do hope that they are very valuable for you and your professional development. But even more important is what you achieve in your work, whether it's in Yaroslav, whether it's in Volgograd, Rostov, Stavropol. And I'm glad that you will have an opportunity to present your experiences during this seminar. Because the work you do is very, very important. These are challenging times in many ways for democratic values in Europe, in Russia, in the world. And the Council of Europe has 47 member states, all committed to promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Russia is a member state of the Council of Europe, and Russia has approved the policy recommendations on education that this program aims to implement. And the Council of Europe learning and teaching resources that we use for this program are provided in official Russian translations. But none of this would amount to much unless education professionals like you translate these policies into practice in schools, in classrooms, in universities, in the community. And the Wergeland Center, which I represent, was set up to support this process of implementing policy to practice. It is, as Anastasia said, a resource center on education for democratic citizenship, human rights, and intercultural understanding. We were established in 2009 through an agreement between the Council of Europe and Norway. And since then, we have worked closely with member states of the Council of Europe on how to make civic education a reality in schools, in curriculum, in teacher trainings. And currently, we run programs and projects involving about 25 countries. But we can do nothing by ourselves. We need good partners. And in Russia, we were fortunate enough to find the Moscow School of Civic Education. And it's been a pleasure to work with you and to learn from you. And though I know these are difficult times for the school, I'm confident we will continue both our partnership and this program. And let me also express my gratitude for your hospitality and for all the hard work you put in preparing this seminar. However, the biggest thank you goes to you. You've all taken time from your work, your families, and friends to come here and participate in this seminar. Most of you also traveled far to come here. And this is very, very inspiring for us. And I hope that we are able to return some of that inspiration to you during this seminar. I wish you all the best. Enjoy the seminar, and thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Lars has just said that they wouldn't be able to do this job without partners, and they found our school. And Moscow, the Moscow school, would not be able to implement this project without our partners in the regions, without our community of our graduates, and without bright enthusiasts who were interested in the topic. 3 years ago, we have started negotiations with Galina Denisova from Rostov-on-Don, the professor of in the local university, Olga Bodrova from the Foundation of the Peace from Stavropol, and we all had certain ideas, but we didn't know what to do about it. As a result, we have reached some consensus and we have made our agreements on international and on regional levels, and that's the way it works. And well, it seems to us that it does work. Sometimes the results are too good to be true. We are going to hold a specific session with the participation of the representatives of the four regions. They will tell us about their experience, and I'd like to thank you all and give the floor to Galina Sergeyevna to hear, her way of description of the situation in the regions. Yes, this is another seminar. As Anastasia said, we have a number of such seminars. This is the second seminar in the Moscow area, but we work in the regions. The regions design their own work. I am truly glad that we have this kind of partnership. I am deeply convinced that we cannot do it on our own. We need a systemic approach. We have to work in parallel when we build partnership relationships between schools and universities, schools and schools. As a matter of fact, there are not too many contacts or informal contacts between schools. We need interaction at the interregional level so that we do not feel alone. When we interact, we are viewed by other European colleagues, and I am very glad that other regions get involved. Yesterday on a bus I heard about Bryansk, which is another region. We talk about the European space, and Russia is a part of this space. We talk about civil values, which are general for everybody, or common for everybody. We have our own traditional understanding of what the civil society is, and it does not always correlate with the European ideas, European views on the subject. Now we've been trying to build a total or general or common understanding of what we have to do in this area. What we develop in schools or at schools, civil understanding, at what level? At the level of values or the level of skills, whether it is something ritual, skills without values. It does not work usually. There are some dry shapes which, fade away as soon as we stop dealing with it. During these 3 years, we've been trying to find a way to establish or to secure values. As Anastasia, that methodology is good, but you may develop it yourself if you understand the values which we've been trying to implement into practice. So this seminar is another step to understand in understanding such processes. I mean, values which are required at schools. I wish you all the good work within these 3 days. I want this job to be intense, and I want horizontal contacts to be strengthened, I mean, between regions and between schools in this region. Thank you very much. Colleagues, now we open the first session. This is the session of Marietta Chudakova. I will introduce you a little bit. Well, I would never represent Marietta Amarovna in Lena's presence because actually I feel embarrassed because I'm not sure of my Russian next to you. And it's very difficult to introduce you because there are so many teachers of literature, of Russian language, many historians, many people who are involved in the public activity, and you all know Marietta Chudakova because she is a historian of literature, she's a writer, she's a critic and a public figure. She works with libraries and she performs certain civil initiatives. She's a patriot of the country and she has her own civilian stand, which is very important for us here. And this is the person, okay, I'm not going to take your time because you have to listen to Marietta. Good day, dear colleagues. Probably mostly the historians or people connected with schools. And I would like to tell you straight off what I think about our chief task for people who were described as intellectuals. Intellectually, it is someone who deals with the destinies of the country. This is the definition. In different times, in different countries, the fate of the country depends on this layer or on that layer. In the Latin American countries, it all depended on the army, where the army took power, and then it was named junta, or it stopped junta from taking power. In the coal area, it all depended on miners. Several years ago, I said with assurance that presently the fate of our country depends on the school teacher, a teacher of history most of all. And when I invented this idea 4 years ago, well, not invented, of course, I understood that that's the way it is. And the last year convinced me 100% that this is right. This is a simple logical consideration. We are frightened by awful ratings when 86% vote for God knows what, and they say you can't do anything about it. Satarov in his interview once said, but the majority is not with you, you are minority. And he said, don't talk to me about majority. Majority thought that the earth, that the universe rotates around the earth, and only one person thought differently, and he was right. But a very simple idea, a rating is flexible. In several years, it will be formed by people whom you teach today in the senior grades. That's very simple. And that's really obvious. So what we give to these people up to 17, books, literature, influence people before they reach 17. When you are 30, you may read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and you may go and kill someone because it does not affect you. A child is influenced by his family, books, and school, if the teacher is good. So now we have to do our best to deal with adolescents. I do my best, and I'll tell you what I do, and I will show you some of my books. But this is my thesis, so to speak. This is my credo, my creed. Now, the situation is getting more and more difficult, and you may get 4 years of jail if you show doubts about the activities of Stalin during the war. At the same time, there is a movement of civil education. It is not noticeable, but it does grow. Within the last month, I received lots of requests to read a public lecture here or there. In my literature institute, there are university Saturdays, and people need these public lectures. There are public lectures everywhere. Actually, it's growing. And the word civil, oh, well, they introduce me as a political figure, and I say no. I am an active citizen and nothing else. But you have to strengthen this word somehow, and this school is a good place for it. Later, I'll tell you about my books and about the project which has been going on, which is the lessons of the 90s. Some of these books will be delivered or distributed for free, and some of the books you can buy, but cheaper than in the shop. If you don't buy it, that's fine. I will take them to libraries. And that's what I do, actually. I went as far as Kamchatka recently with this interest in the local libraries. I have prepared the presentation, which is named in the program. But actually, I don't know whether I shall be able to reach the 20s. The 20s. Well, the discussion of the 20th century, you should start with the big reform. Even our chairman of the Constitutional Court says that serfdom was quite good, and probably we shall return to it. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't know what you can hear when you switch on your TV. You live in some virtual world.
But first I would like to introduce my presentation to you. I think you all know it only too well that there is a common understanding that scholars are supposed to write books on history in line with patriotic trends. I think it's absurd, and I've been doing that for quite some time. And I think that if it is a dedicated history textbook, then it will be just one-sided. On the opposite, we are learning the history of our homeland because this is our homeland. And as for patriotism, it goes without saying, and that's the reason we are studying the history of Russia, because this is our homeland, and it doesn't mean that we will start loving the country only after we study the history. And what will happen if the picture of the 20th century is quite smooth? And if it is smooth, does it mean that people should not be patriotic? So it means that in history, the only objective is to look for truth. So I have some quotations for my presentation signed by an anonymous philosopher. The first objective of history is restraint from lying. The other objective is not to hide truth. In the Soviet times, I was not aware of that saying, but in my group of friends, we tried to tell the truth and not to hide truth. And third, you should not give any pretext to be suspected in bias. And those who do not remember your history are doomed to repeat mistakes. Then comes my own saying, truth cannot be useless. I said it just incidentally, but I think it's true. And I was asked a long time ago, what's the use of learning that great writer Bulgakov was a drug addict? Sometimes truth can be useless, but I don't think so. And quite recently I came to learn that some book was published by Professor Constance and The Long Shadow of the Past. The title reads the memory, culture and the history of historical politics. And it calls for admitting the national guilt. And the professor writes that it doesn't threaten the nation. On the contrary, both the nation, the country, the people will have a chance to separate themselves from those crimes committed in history and voice in support of the civil society. And that can apply to the situation in this country. I keep on saying that raising patriotism cannot be passive. And we can be, pride is something that I don't like mostly. There is a lot of references to orthodoxy, but pride is one of the deadly sin in Christianity. So you should really see what is really right. It's a great position when you just sit idling and be proud of your history. Well, I don't think it's the right thing. I believe that we need to disseminate active patriotism, and people should be aware of the very tragic pages of our history, and people should understand, teenagers in the first place, that it depends on them, so that those tragedies would not repeat. If you just talk to a teenager, and if it is a woman asks a teenager to help her, that teenager will spare no effort to help that woman. The reason is that teenagers should feel that they are taken seriously, that their help is really needed. So we need to engage teenagers so that they would be responsible for the future of the country. In the history of Russia in 20th century were three major events. Dictatorship of Bolsheviks, that was mystically referred to as the power of the Soviets. It was not true. We know that the Communist Party was in charge. The second great event was the Great Patriotic War, and the third one was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Soviet power. So, before we start discussing the three events, I think we should really revisit that big reform time. And even in some rather good textbooks on history, one can read that we need to teach or train school kids how to work with original sources. I don't think it's true. Even postgraduate students sometimes cannot work properly with the originals, the sources. And sometimes I even believe that kids come to school just to learn how to study. And some time back, I began thinking that humanities, when teaching humanities, one should propose some axioms Many people believe that axioms is something that is common for math or physics, but for humanities, we should really, in humanities, we should really agree that after the October revolution, the country was brought into a wrong direction for 70 years. We should really think about that. And there are some aspects that can be offered to students for consideration. And I also I'm not certain if serfdom can be referred to as slavery. And it's not just an empty question, because we should really see if our ancestors were slaves or serfs, or with the things were different. It was Mr. Radishev who called serfs slaves, but Alexander Pushkin, the great poet, objected to that, strongly objected. And Radishev was making a point about the freedom of travel and own household, and Radishev wrote that landlords made serfs look for income elsewhere. And Pushkin stresses that for centuries Russian people didn't have their own homes. And even till now, people do not want to realize that Yeltsin and Gaidar expropriated property from the people. But nobody admits that following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian people became the owners of their apartments. And apartments, that real estate, property, it costs a lot. I have plenty of examples when a single elderly lady lives in a big apartment, and she rents a couple of rooms, and it helps her to be supported. And it's really means that people are owners of their property now, which was not the case before in the Soviet times. And so even Pushkin thought about that, and he wrote that when a poor person went on wandering around the country, he was really deprived of any property. And William Richardson of Britain, who came to St. Petersburg, wrote that Russian farmers, Russian peasants were the poorest slaves, along with horses and dogs. And that British gentleman wrote that Russian peasant was deprived of any property. So any property, even that poor clothes, could be taken away from that peasant. And you can think about that, but we should really think of what Pushkin wrote about Russian peasants. He wrote about their courage, about their smartness, and travelers could travel around Russia without speaking Russian, but everywhere that traveler would be well received and will be given retreat and food. And another quotation, you will never see in the Russian people negligence and mistreatment of foreigners. So, but anyway, according to the definition of the League of Nations and the UN definition, a serf is equated to a slave. But if you try to study that big reform that happened in 1861, a war was started in the United States between South and North. That was the war against slavery, and it took the Americans 4 years to defeat the supporters of slavery in a very bloody war. And in Russia, serfdom was abolished just by the decree of the emperor. So while telling the Russian story, you should really see that history junction. And say in 1862, President Lincoln signed an act on the construction of the Great Pacific Railroad. And after 25 years, some 3,000 kilometers of the railroad was built. In Russia, the process was quite slower, and we had only 70,000 of railway at that time. And we should really see if we really got rid of serfdom or slavery. And every time you are telling the Russian story, you should really emphasize those history junctions. And but we should really see how we can oppose those anti-American feelings and aspirations. We should teach the teenagers that it's not appropriate. And in the United States, racism stood for quite some time, and even in the 1960s, we saw some lynch execution cases. So in 1965, in the state of Alabama, white parents demanded that a black girl should be expelled from school. And those were the true stories, but the government of the state said that we would never do that, and that black schoolgirl was bused to the school. A bus brought her to school, and then the bus took you away from school. So she went to the school that was convenient to her, and it happened in 1965. And I traveled to the United States, and I taught a lot of courses there, and we should really see what is good about America. And just 15 years after that incident with a black girl, the United States voted for a black president, and in the southern states they also voted for him. I wish such things could happen in Russia, and I wish we should stop criticizing Yegor Gaidar, who had really saved the country, and I brought my book about him. I had bought it from the publishing house, and if anybody wants to buy it here from me, much cheaper, you are welcome. And actually, when I was writing the book, it was not meant for profit, for money. It was meant for ideological reasons. I wanted justice, and even when kids, we were never taught to be cruel. We were taught to be merciful, to be generous, and if it's a kid of 4 years, you could see how those kids are weeping if justice is broken or is violated. And the circulation was 3,000. I bought them all, and I brought them to many libraries around the country. And now I also paid for about 500 books with my own money, and I distribute them among the libraries and some groups. And I'm receiving great feedback from students. I took one letter with me. I cannot find it now, and that letter was written by a boy from Tatarstan. And the letter just shocked me with the fact how smart that boy is. So it means that kids are really can really see what's right, what's wrong, and those kids are even opposing their parents if they say something wrong. And they write that with the help of those books, their families came to reconciliation about 1990s. And Piotr Zańczkowski, a great historian, once gave me another book of some historian. The book was about reforms and the fear people have when reforms are started. I strongly recommend you to read that book, and I can quote a small piece of that book. At the entrance, there is a crowd of people wearing some strange costumes, red jackets. It's at the house of a landlord, and those people are holding white porcelain pipes that Germans normally carry. Yefim, why are you dressed so strangely? Well, my master ordered me to be dressed like that, and why? Well, you know, we are all dressed as Germans because we are working with German machines. And are there any genuine Germans? Yes, there are 6 original Germans, and we are 10 who are just dressed like Germans. That's a great book. Telling you that sometimes very strange things were made. And in 1861, that manifest that abolished the serfdom, and it was called Philip's letter, and it has its own history. I'm not going to talk very much in detail about that, but it tells you that it's very important to start the 20th century from the big reform. And telling you the story about the 20th century, you should start with that big reform. And I'm talking about the 19th century, that act that abolished serfdom. Then the judicial reforms, great judicial reforms were introduced, allowing for the court of jury. And it resulted, unfortunately, in terror. And it's common now among Muslims, but very unfortunately that the terror practices were first seen in Russia. And when the court of jury was introduced, those hearings attracted so many people. They went to those courts hearings like to drama theaters, and they were very much inspired by some speeches of lawyers, counsels for defense, and a nephew of poet Bloch was describing the atmosphere, the environment of 1890s. He was writing about criminal proceedings, and it was really like a play, a drama, and one person was acting and like various characters at the trial. And my father was from Dagestan, and my mother was born near the Russian city of Suzdal. So actually, the only person who went to the classical Russian school was my father, who came from Dagestan. And he was telling me so many things about that kind of education. For instance, he remembered very well, and he remembered the speeches by the most famous lawyer, Mr. Plevaka. Personally, I was not aware of him, and my father was telling me a story of his shortest speech. A priest in a village church had stolen a kettle, and evidence was overwhelming, and it was proved. And then lawyer Plevaka appealed the jury. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, how many times that person had relieved you your sin? Please relieve his sin just once." And the entire jury voted in favor of the priest not being guilty. And in the 18th century, the military reform was also very important. It took place in 1874, and another prominent person, Mr. Milutin, described it in detail. And he initiated that reform. And in 1869, the draft, the conscripts served forever, for life. And so those peasants who married at the age of 15 or 17 then were drafted into the army, and they stayed there forever, separated from the family. But then, according to that reform, replaced that for life conscription with a certain term of service. So, the terms and times of service were only 6 years in the ground forces and 7 years in the navy. And that military reform was continued, and by 1914, in the infantry and in the artillery, soldiers served for 3 years only. In the other arms and services, 4 years, and in the Navy, 5 years. But as I said, those reforms, no matter how odd it may look, led to terror. And I can refer to another prominent figure, who is Herman Plesetsky. He wrote about many historical events. He wrote a lot of lyrics on that, and he used to joke in his poem about Tsar Nicholas, who was walking across a city without any guards, and nobody was trying to shoot him. Tsar Alexander freed farmers, peasants, serfs, and no matter how strange it may look, after that reform of freedom, the waves of terror began in the Russian Empire. And in that great novel of Days of the Turbines, one character was speculating about Russian people. He called the Russian people as Tsar killers, since most of the Tsars were assassinated by Russian people. And he recalled the assassinations of Peter III and Pavel I, and Alexander II, who actually liberated serfs, and he was assassinated. He was shot down by Alexei Karakozov, and when he was captured, that Alexei Karakozov, Tsar Alexander, came to him and asked if he was Russian. Karakozov says, yes, I'm Russian. And the Tsar asked, why did you shoot at me? The Tsar was certain that only a Pole could have fired at him. And Karakozov was a very brave man, and he said, you have deceived the people. You promised to give people land, but you failed. And it was partially true, because Serbs were liberated, but they were not given land. By the way, even with the most intellectual people, I don't watch TV. Because as in Bulgakov's novel, one character said that I cannot watch it because I'm a sick man. And once I don't watch TV, I read a lot of things and see how many smart and intelligent people are there. And that's about death penalty. And the people do not realize that since Empress Elizabeth of the 18th century, of the 17th century, there had been no death penalty for criminal crimes, and people could be executed only because of an attempt to assassinate a Tsar. And Tsars were believed to be blessed by God. So it was the deadliest crime. And the other type of crime that called for a death penalty was the violation of the plague's quarantine measures. So for centuries there had been no death penalties in Russia, because nobody tried to assassinate a Tsar, and quarantine measures were not violated by the people. And we should really realize that. And the first person in my family who realized what the Soviet power meant was my cousin, who had graduated from a law school. And when he started in that law school, he asked his father how it could be that the coroners, the police investigators, they bring me ballot forms at elections, and that ballot forms have their names, and we have secret voting, secret ballot. And my father was a devoted communist first, but in 1956 he changed his mind. But my cousin really spoke strongly against death penalty. And in 1951, the one German spy was caught in the Soviet Union, and my cousin told me that that German had been involved in sabotage, and he was executed. And I was really impressed. First, he was telling that story to my mom, and then to me. And that made my cousin stop sleeping. That caused insomnia, because my cousin was involved in the trial and verdict. And that cousin, he fought during World War II, and he killed people there. But he felt different about killing people at war and signing death penalty for even spies.
So he told me that there are many reasons why people may be killed. There are 17 reasons, I mean, death penalty, and in the South Africa it's only 5 reasons. And of course, this was the bogey of the world at that time. And he told me that actually his topic of dissertation was liberation from punishment. That was his dissertation. And he said, if I might soften our criminal code, that would be justification of my life. So someone might kill 15 persons and may go to jail. Nobody planned to shoot him. I remember a woman, that was a long time ago, and she said that my mother always told that on Easter you have to bring cookies to people who sit in jail. And so for a Russian person, that was a tough line. When someone is at large, he's a killer. Okay, let us remove this picture because this diverts your attention. Yes, yes, I'm removing this because it's difficult to that diverts your attention. So I want you to stress this idea during your lessons. Before Bolsheviks, Russia didn't have death penalty for 200 years for criminal affairs. I taught in Canada in '95, and I was a member of a commission against death penalty, and I was shown around the jails, and they made a program for me, and I was assisted by deputy minister. He was driving a car himself. Can you imagine the deputy minister of our Ministry of Internal Affairs driving the wheel without any guard? And he told me that that they didn't have death penalty for 25 years. And I asked him whether something was changed. He said that our population is pretty difficult, Indians and so on. He said the number of crimes didn't go up. So every year, he said, the society demands a return of the death penalty, but the government is against it. So in all the countries of the world, it does exist. I think this is a pretty actually a vital topic for schools, because they want to bring the death penalty back. And this is our deputies. You have to invent something when you get 450,000 rubles a month. Actually, 2 months and it's almost a million. And it's hard to spend this money here if they don't go abroad. You drink once or twice, you buy the most expensive cognac, so you have to do something. And evidently, they have some problems with their heads. Now they received 450 rubles, that's their salary, that's impossible. Now they want to return death penalty. And this relates to public disciplines. For 7 years, I was a member of the commission against death penalty. And my task was not to take money from the authorities, and your hands will be tied. And I read lots of convictions, and sometimes you feel awful. You can't understand it. and our job was to reduce the sentence. We worked for the president. We were the continuation of his constitutional function. It's the constitution says that the president exercises pardon or forgiveness. Two persons with legal education says things which are illiterate from legal point of view. They say that for pardon of Khodorkovsky, you have to a pardoned person. And what I'm telling you now is the truth, because I worked at this pardon commission. Anyway, in our group there were lawyers, some of them were the judge with 20 years of experience, and we know that for sure, and I want you to understand it. They say that you have to ask pardon, and you say you have to say that you are guilty. No, this is wrong. There are two articles in the Constitution. One of them is about the accused one. Every accused, when he's convicted, from the first day of the conviction, he has the right to ask for pardon. Pardon may mean a reduction or obliteration of your sentence. Nothing else. He has this kind of right. And in the article President, it says, President exercises this pardon. You are all educated people. Constitution, you know that Constitution operates directly. Yes, we remove this notebook because it's dangerous to have it around. Anyway, this is the law of direct order. Putin introduced some decree when this commission was disbanded in 2001, and there were certain limitations, so you have to ask for pardon. Of course, you may issue lots of decrees, but Constitution operates above all such decrees, and there are no restrictions. President exercises pardon, and that really means that he can do it. He can perform this function on the basis of Constitution. When someone was arrested, when someone was held in custody, when someone goes to court during the trial, even during the trial, theoretically, it is possible in line with the Constitution. Someone says, and he says that the president pardoned this person. That's it. That's it. It can be done. That's 100% like this. The rest is delirium. And we are quite delirious, as a matter of fact. But who will bring the light? Only you. People who are connected with schools. You should not allow to somehow spoil young people's heads. Let them think normally. So now, in the end of the 60s, Sergei Nechayev came on the stage, and he actually taught the God's law. He found proper people in St. Petersburg for his case. His case was named Народная расправа, which is popular punishment, popular destruction, which is absolutely cool position of Nechayev. Was example of people who followed Lenin later. Lenin was in favor of Nechayev. He said to Lunacharsky, once how Nechayev was criticized by Dostoevsky. As to the jury trial, in 1878, Vera Zasulich was on trial because she shot at the Governor Trepov. She shot him in the face. And they say, by the way, that he was illegal son of the emperor. So she shot him in the face. Dostoevsky was during this trial, and he said, he was in court, and he said, of course, you should tell her, go and sin no more. That should be her punishment. And that's pretty precise. But Russia is very special. So she was justified. She was acquitted. She was acquitted by the jurors. But people shouted, glory to Zasulich, and there were lots of applause. This is Russia. That's the way we do it, only from top to bottom. And she was set free, and people held her on her hands, on their hands. This was 1878, and the verdict was not guilty, and she goes free, although she shot the governor in the face. If you are in St. Petersburg, you might find some truth. And then it was followed by terror. Terror started at this, the individual terror. I mean, the action of individual people. So Vera Zasulich, noble emotions, a feeling of justice, and so actually she was to be punished because she shot someone in his face. He was to blame as well, but it was not necessary to kill him. But the society said whoever is unjust behaves, whoever behaves in an unjust way, who is a bad person, he might be killed by self-court, self-justice. But you also take risks and you sacrifice your own life. Under this condition, it's fine. And this was permission for the terror throughout the country. And there were many people in Russia who were ready to sacrifice their own lives. And that was the case in the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, till the revolution. I deal with history all along. My granddaughter was in the 9th grade. She called me and said, I don't know what to do. And they studied the 20th century. She said, I read through and I don't understand anything. And I asked her, who is the author of your textbook? It was Kasulin and Danilov. And I went to the bookstore, bought this book, read it, and I said, there is nothing wrong with your brains, it's their brains that are in trouble. And there are some phrases which are not connected with each other. There are paragraphs which are kind of motley, a quilt. It's kind of quilt. And actually, I was preparing texts for her, for each lesson myself. And there was not email at that time. I met her and gave her my writings, and she also produced about 100 pages of text. And she paid me a great compliment when she received good marks. And she said, you know, now I understand the historic process. Of course, it was a great compliment for me. I explained, for instance, the meaning of the word social. In our historic text books, authors, they do not think whether someone when she is 15 knows the meaning of this word, but nobody knows the real meaning of the word social, for instance, at 15, because even grown-ups don't know what it is. You have to explain what is social, what is socialism, what is revolution. You have to explain it in a very clear words and phrases. Well, peasant socialism by Herzen and so on. You have to explain it all. I recommend to you to understand Narodovolцы, people's will, what we understood some time ago. You have to read Origins, Istoki by Aldanov. He studied the issue pretty thoroughly. And there were 7 attempts on the Tsar. He was said that you have to take another route, and he said, no, I don't want to hide from my own people. They were good Tsars, as a matter of fact. So when Rusakov made the first attempt, and the attempt failed, and actually the horses went crazy, and the Tsar was unprotected at the moment. And only Cossack said to the policeman, you have to remove His Majesty quickly. And the Tsar was moving on, and someone said, let us go to the palace. And the Tsar said, I want to see everything. He didn't know what he wanted to see, but he said, show me the place of explosion. Lydia Ginsburg described the same situation, and she said that there was a boy who was killed. There was a boy with a basket who was killed because of the explosion. And so everybody admired this people's will, but people forgot about a young boy who was killed at the moment. And the Tsar didn't suffer. The Tsar survived. So Tsar was moving in an ugly way, and actually Perovskaya was followed him, and people were shocked. Everybody was shocked, and there was a terrorist was the person who stood nearby. It was Grinevitsky. Grinevitsky. He stood nearby and he saw the Tsar watching, and there are photographs of this. And in the final zigzag, Tsar was next to this man in his head, and he looked in his eyes, and Brzezinski raised his hand and threw the parcel which he held in his hand, and there was an explosion. Both of them were wounded, and they sat at the gates, and they were both bleeding. And of course, the Tsar was supposed to understand that this guy meant something evil, because his head, he had his a cap or a hat on his head, which was impossible in the presence of the Tsar. So he was supposed to suspect something, but he didn't, and there was an explosion. And Dr. Marcus looked into the eye of a dying man, and he lost conscience himself, and there was a silence for 3 minutes, and people asked, do we have any hope? And Dr. Botkin said, no hope, it's hopeless. And that's the way it went. And now Aldanov describes the way these people were executed, and there was a procedure, and some people shouted, "He has to be pardoned," and so on. And after that, there were no public executions, because this time it was public in the presence of people. Alexei Tolstoy, during the war, well, he felt really sick when he saw how they hanged policemen. He said that there are people, there are things you should not see. When someone is hanged, you should not be present. Natal Edelman wrote that we usually admire the acts of revolution, but conspirators wanted to be creative, actually, and Sofia Perovskaya did not plan to be a terrorist. She wanted to be a teacher and a doctor. Alexander III took the throne. He did not plan to continue reforms, but the reforms move on. Gorbachev said that the process went on, which was made a laughing stock. Actually, the process is going on. Yeah, well, we need some time for discussion. We need to leave some time for discussion. Yes, I watch the clock. I'm fine. A historian I worked with, Natalia Zeifman, she is now in Israel. She wrote a dissertation, education in Russia in the period of Alexander's reforms, Alexander III. And she found out that there was no law, actually, about children of cooks, so to speak. There was just a decree that these people are allowed to get education, but this was never implemented, this was never realized. Bulgakov's friend, a doctor from Kiev, when he was 92, he told me that your generation wouldn't be able to understand our time. You wouldn't understand our times because you are accustomed to these children of cooks. And in our case, our gymnasium was filled with aristocrats. And actually, there were poor people also, and they were paid by merchants. I mean, their education was paid by merchants, and I remember them all. He said one of them turned out to be an engineer, and this position was paid well. Another one was turned to be a doctor, a lawyer. So you wouldn't be able to understand our times. Suppose you are a good pupil, and then someone paid for you. Someone paid for you for your education. I remember how a senior citizen shouted at me, "You received your education due to the Soviet power." I said, "I'm sorry, I was the first student, not only in my class, but in my school, and someone would pay for me. I would get my education without any Soviet power." And that's what I told him. But this was truth. Now, reforms of Alexander III went on. The process went on. And Alexander III mentioned the Pacific and Trans-Siberian Railroad. In 91, he sent Nicholas II, his heir, the future Tsar, to Vladivostok to introduce the first rail there from Mias to Vladivostok. And the manifesto was, or rescript, he said, start building direct railway through Siberia. This is my will after observing foreign countries. And he said that you also have to introduce Ussuri part of this Trans-Siberian rail. This road was completed after his death, and there was a direct railroad line more than 8,000 kilometers in 1905 between Vladivostok and St. Petersburg. This was completed, this road was completed in 1916. I traveled in 2006 from Vladivostok to Moscow for 1 month, and I made 17 stops, 17 libraries, 17 meetings with people, and so on. And before we sent our books to 5 towns, and librarians, they understood everything, that they had to pick up the books and they had to wait for me. No secretaries, no institutions were involved. There were just 2 of us, myself and my friend who was our driver. And we went on, and I traveled through this federal route, so-called federal route, from Blagoveshchensk to Chita. It was 1,200 kilometers of bad road, country road, no roads. I don't know how we survived, because 5 times when the road went vertical, I was sure that we will jump over, will be turned over, or rolled over. But there is a very good saying in Russia, if you are destined to be hanged, you will not drown. And for the last 200 kilometers, we moved very slowly because our tires were almost flat. No person inside, nobody. And when I think about it, I say that our own land is not used. Why do we need other people's lands? These are wonderful lands, but they are not populated. And we discussed with our drivers why we needed Khabarovsk. And the driver said, we shouldn't give this land to Chinese. And anyway, my point is that since 1916 or 1917, the Soviet power didn't make another parallel line. We traveled along this single rail line. Suppose something happened. Actually, Europe will be disconnected from Asia. We have only this line. But we don't seem to have problems.
The Khodynka tragic event was another milestone in history. I'm not going to speak about that at length, but it ruined Nicholas II's reputation, since a lot of people died in that accident. Let me see how many people died there. It was a terrible event. Even hardened military and firefighters were shocked. So nearly 4,000 people died in that accident, but Nicholas II never cancelled the party for his coronation, and the subjects never forgot that. Next came the Russian-Japanese War, and again my strong recommendation is to read that book about the unknown war. And it features some materials on the Russian-Japanese War. I always believed that I knew a lot about that, but it really enriched me with much more facts. And the book reads about the voyage of the Second Pacific Squadron of ships, military vessels, and on the ships there were no carpets and other luxury and leisure objects, and one German naval specialist, when he saw the interiors of military vessels, was really shocked and said that in Germany on German ships you would never see such modest environment. And that squadron sailed around Africa, around Asia, to Japan, and in order to raise morale there, and sometimes Russian history features a lot of shocking events, and so it is that to raise the morale, the commanders decided to do the following, and the spirits were very low. And the coal was loaded in plenty, and there was a lot of coal, but in tropical climate, such loading work was very dangerous, and it was happening in the south of Africa, and the coal dust, together with humidity climate, soaked in the interior of ships and caused a lot of deaths of sailors who were breathing that dusty air. So that very unusual decision was to buy some tropical animals, and the squadron was turned into kind of a zoo with a lot of tropical animals and birds on board. And even crocodiles and poisonous snakes were in the zoo. And a snake was circling a cannon, and then it bit a captain. Captain Rождественский had a fever. His deputy had a stroke, and then that Rear Admiral died because of that stroke. But his death was not announced because the squadron was approaching the would-be battlefield, and the dead body was put into a fridge, and his death was not announced. Besides, some cruiser was expected to join the squadron and bring some warm clothes, despite the fact that the climate was very hot. And then the tragical Tsushima battle happened. I read Novikov Priboy novel on that, but you know, I was struck by tragic figures and numbers. So the team of entire ships were killed, numbering to 800 people. So there were cruisers and destroyers who lost nearly all their teams. Others were imprisoned by the Japanese. And Captain Osleberg, who replaced the dead Rear Admiral, refused to leave the sinking cruiser. And the Tsushima disaster is really shocking to us. Japanese lost 3 torpedo boats and 116 sailors. In Russian fleet, 21 ships were destroyed, 3 admirals, and from 35 to 100 sailors. So those losses were huge and senseless. So actually, on that day, the 2nd Pacific Squadron ceased to exist. Admiral Rojdestinsky, who led the squadron, was first imprisoned. Then he was given to the Russian side, and he was tried in St. Petersburg. But he was justified because the counsel for the prosecution refused to charge him with any accusations, and that the defeat really summed up the entire epoch, and that last page was a bloody page that closed individual volume of the history of the people, that the reports of that time in the media. And that great defeat of 1905 was described by the later Prime Minister Stolypin. He wrote that Russians would never die for some unknown land, the land that was not theirs. That describes very well the properties of a Russian person. We really start fighting seriously only when invaders come to this country, and Russians cannot fight outside their country. But that Russian-Japanese war brought to us 3 very well-known and popular songs. One is the Cruiser of Varyak. The other is about the cold waves hitting the ships, and the third one is In the Hills of Manchuria. That's the title of the song. And in the Battle of Mukden, soldiers of Mokshansk regiment resisted to the last effort, and in order to raise morale, the brass band got up and began playing some marches. And the soldiers counterattacked and broke through the Japanese lines, and that gave the theme for the waltz of the Manchuria Hills. I'm not going to speak much about the revolution of 1905, but the October Manifest introducing the freedom of meetings and parties really opened some new epoch for the people. Censorship was abolished, and we should tell our teenagers, our kids, what censorship meant in those times, and draw a parallel with the censorship of the Bolsheviks. And the censorship was imposed by the Soviets, and it lasted till 1993. And it was abolished only by the Constitution, and Article 29, Part 5 reads that censorship is banned. In violation of the Constitution, we have a lot of censorship efforts now on TV, but it's not the case with the press and publishing houses. My books are published, or have been published for many years, starting from 1993, and there has not been a single time when my books were banned or changed because of censorship reasons. And now, the manifest, the October Manifest, didn't help much. Although some parties came into being, such as Cadets and Constitutional Democrats, but it didn't help to appease the country, since in those years, more than 4,000 civil servants and governmental officials were assassinated. And only after that, the decision was taken to appoint Mr. Stolypin as the prime minister. Stolypin used to be the Saratov governor, and Shulgin, the former member of parliament in the State Duma of 1995, wrote a lot about that person. And when Stolypin was informed, when there was a great crowd in one of the squares, without any escort, and it has some references about the serfdom too. So it was in 1905, 1906. So he went in a carriage to the crowd, and when he was a governor then, and the crowd began approaching that governor, threatening him, and there was one big guy with a stick, and the governor was not frightened, and he moved towards that young guy. And when Stolypin came to that young guy, he took off his gray coat. And he threw that gray coat to that guy, telling him to hold it for a while. That guy was shocked. He obediently took that gray coat and dropped his stick. So the governor then told the crowd to be disbanded. And that was the direct effect of the serfdom. Should you try to do the same in North Caucasus? It wouldn't work. My father, who, as I said, came from Dagestan, was telling me that there was no serfdom in the Caucasus, and when I visited his native village in 1978, and my grandfather was a rich man, and he was executed. He was an officer in the Tsarist army, and he was executed in 1938. He had a lot of sheep, and when sheep were cut, the first 3 bags of wool were given to the poor people. And following the cutting of wool, there was a party, and when I asked them, the local people, where my father had been sitting during that party, those local folks were very surprised. They said, all men sat at the same table, so there was no difference between rich or poor, noble men and simple men. And I would like to ask you to bring one copy of each book back here for me. And in Russia, it's traditional that we go to extremes in our thinking. But you cannot paint Mr. Stolypin with a single paint, because he took office at the time then nobody knew what to do. And once he was accused of, by MP Rodichev of introducing the court, martial courts, and Stolypin challenged that MP and demanded that they would shoot at the duel. That deputy was frightened. But I'm not talking, it's not something that matters. What was a person supposed to do in a country when the uncle of the current Tsar, the governor of Moscow, was assassinated by a bomb in the Ivanovsky Square, that is believed to be a holy, a sacred square in Moscow? So, following just 1 month following that manifestation and rally in St. Petersburg. So, what could the head of the government do under the circumstances when even the family of a Tsar couldn't travel from St. Petersburg to Moscow to attend the funerals of their uncle? and because it was too dangerous, and it meant that even the emperor couldn't freely travel about his country. So I am saying that just to describe the times when Mr. Stolypin was appointed the prime minister. And I'm calling upon you to tell those stories to your students, and specifically in senior grades. And sometimes you can do only speak about something only briefly, but sometimes we should give them those details. And those terrorists in those days were not just terrorists. They were actually they were very much ideologically motivated, and many terrorists came to officials' offices, and Stolypin survived several assassinations, although in one of them his daughter and son were very badly injured. And on the day of that bombing attack, his deputy came to him, and Stolypin said that we should not be affected by that. We should keep on with our reforms. In a minute, we will switch to a discussion, but I can really emphasize by saying that Russia and the Soviet Russia were two different countries. And in those years, Leonid Andreev wrote his greatest story about the 7 hanged people. That story was published 27 times, and the story was based on real facts. So those 7 persons were plotting an assassination of a justice minister, and they were really accused of the conspiracy and sentenced to death. And that story, written by brilliant Leonid Andreev, impressed a lot of people. Even Bolshevik Angarsky, he was a devoted Bolshevik, but he wrote and published the story of devil, and he also published the Wiki Eggs and the Dog's Heart stories by Bulgakov. So I'm referring to his memoirs. The author could hardly keep temper telling about that great story. We were nearly weeping. We were dreaming to revenge on those hangmen for the death of our compatriots on the gallows. And then Bolshevik party seized power. They began practicing that. But that Bolshevik Angarsky in 1939 was imprisoned, put to a concentration camp, then released. But in 1949 he was arrested again and executed. And we will never know who he hated sitting in a death cell in 1940s. But we can know for sure that no writer wrote a single story about inmates of the death cells in the Soviet Union. And very briefly, I'll tell you about some more things that are mandatory to be told to our students. And first of all, it's about Marxism, since Marxism was the dominating ideology for nearly 100 years. Certainly communism or total equality were very attractive, have always been very attractive, and the Marxist theory insisted that property belonged to capitalists, and workers are employed and paid for their labor. That was wrong, and the revolution would change things, and the communism will come, and that will be the end of history. And the struggle of the working class cannot be described as the struggle between various classes. I can only recommend you to read Karl Popper's book that is called Open Society and its Animals. And he insists that capitalist society was invented, the term was invented by Karl Marx, and otherwise it's a self-regulating system that can readjust and correct its errors. But it's really nonsense. And when we were young, living in the Soviet Union, we were quite skeptical about most of the Marxists' postures, and that claimed that capitalism was totally unfair. And Karl Popper writes in the introduction, please realized that it was not. It didn't become clear later. It had been known from the very start. And in the Marxist theory, the only dominant feature is the revolution and the expropriation and nationalization. And you know what I mean. And again, it's important to mention that Popper did excellent job describing all those things. So we should not be afraid of dethroning that Marxist theory. Marx was a very clever person, an intellectual person, but even smart people make mistake, and instead of revolutions, people can always come to terms. But Marx insisted that there would no be any alternative but revolution. And Vladimir Lenin really seized this thesis and further elaborated on that, and with implications that we all know. So I think it's worthwhile telling that Marxist story to our students, and we should really make it clear that that Russia of 20th century changed the perception of the role of historical persons and the role of history. Under the influence of Plekhanov, but not only, and my French counterparts told me that many French people believed in that too. And they believed that if Napoleon had never appeared on the scene, somebody else would have appeared. But I believe that the 20th century showed us that should Nicholas II and then Prime Minister Kerensky had not been so weak, and if it had not been for Vladimir Lenin, who had unprecedented, unscrupulous views on the ways of Marxism in Russia. And if it had not been for Stalin's properties, Russian history could have taken a different path. And the other observation I would like to share with you, in 20th century we saw a lot of catastrophes. Then first came the peasants class that was really destroyed, and again I can recommend another book to you, and I hope that you have no allergy, you're not allergic to the names of Gaidar or Chubais. So I can recommend that book by Gaidar, Junctions of History. It gives us some very important answers. Some people claim that we should have followed the Chinese way. I spent a week in China, I attended a conference, and when I returned, I said that we couldn't have taken the Chinese path because there are only a few Chinese living in this country. And frankly speaking, when I was visiting the Chinese opera, and it was such a strange show, they do something that we would never call an opera. And but watching that show, I realized why they broadcast news in English on one channel, and news is quite adequate, while the other channel shows some stories about Mao Zedong, which tells an entirely different philosophy and story. And the Chinese still believe that Mao Zedong was a great leader, and they still have a very big portrait on the square in Beijing. So again, watching that opera, so-called opera, I couldn't imagine that such a show could really take place in Russia. But this book tells us the story how in 1930s we could have taken a Chinese way because of some GDP ratio and the ratio between urban and rural population, and the ratio was the same in 1930s in Russia that they had, the Chinese had in 1980s. And then he wrote how the peasants class was destroyed, and intelligentsia and all Bolsheviks. So Stalin actually destroyed people layer by layer. But then one may argue if we ever had any good points in our history. I believe there are some. I spoke of some historical figures, but I think that we had great personalities despite totalitarian society. You should read some memoirs telling us about the great number of very good people, the people who impacted other people, and that good things they stayed forever, even during the Soviet power. Because even in prisons, in prison cells, there were academicians and fitters and workers sitting together, and academicians for a couple of weeks in that cell told those workers such great stories which inspired those workers. And intelligentsia really was enriching other people. I asked my Western counterparts if my hypothesis was right. Well, in Western society, if a road is going to be built and the community is against, they get together, they receive signatures, and they bring their list to that mayor, and there will be a no road built in that vicinity. No names are there. In Russia it's different. It's the names, it's personalities who really matter. And if you ask all the people if they ever met with such people, strong people, intellectually strong people, they would really tell you that they had. My teacher, Mr. Chudakov, was educated in Siberia. He lived in a very small town of 20,000 people, and academicians and PhD holders from Leningrad came there to teach.
There were different types of academicians or teachers, including my relatives who went to Siberia. 3 friends, gold medal holders, they came to Moscow without their parents, without any connections. And Chudakov joined a philological department, same as myself, and we got married on the 4th year. When they say it's difficult to enter the university now, I laugh, because competition at that time was 25% per one vacancy, and those people were gold medal holders. I don't know how we entered, but we did. There were three musketeers, as we were called, and we entered from the first attempt. Chudakova philological department, another friend of ours joined mining university from the first attempt, including myself. That's the way we were taught. We had some knowledge. Kornilov's case is of special interest. Well, he might be a savior from Bolshevik, a rescuer from Bolshevik, but he might become a dictator, and he was a dictator. But if Kerensky received a window of opportunity and was shown what will happen in 1921 or 1937, if someone would say to Kerensky, what would happen to Russia if you join the Bolsheviks against Kornilov, I would show it to you just for 2 minutes. Good golden autumn of 1921, 1933 and 1937. Go to the window and have a look. 6 minutes of documentary film with enormous amount of corpses. And Kerensky immediately forgot about his ambitions and but there was no magician, and this window was not open, and Russia quickly moved towards its perishment. And actually, we were saved later by miracle. So Kardilov is also someone who is very important. He was declared to be an enemy, but he moved on, and he was supported by soldiers, and everybody wanted peace at that time. And actually, Bolsheviks said that they were in favor of peace. Anyway, I brought books which I give you for free. These are 4 books for teachers. And there was a public council, lessons of the 90s. Some smart people understood that it's difficult now for the teachers to teach about the 90s because nobody understands what to tell to young people. There are big monographs, but teachers have no time to read it, and then they decided to publish such small books. There is a young Petersburg professor, Dmitry Travin, essays on the modern history of Russia. When I was invited, and I asked, how are you going to distribute it? I give it to you, but this is an exception. And they said, well, we shall gather teachers. How are you going to gather them? How? Technologically. Through the Ministry of Education, they say, or I said, no. You will have different criteria on education. I mean, the ministry may think differently. So they said 100 teachers will gather and will tell them about these sets, and then they will take them and they will be using them. And I said, I have to disappoint you. Out of these 100 teachers, maybe 20 will use this book, and that would be good. And they were silent. They were quite smart people, but they were engaged in macroeconomics, and we were talking micro. And I said that the book is not for all teachers. It's a part of their professional activity. How come? Yes, they use their old notebooks, and so then 20% of very good teachers, they will use these new books, of course. I'll give you one name. Chubais asked me why other 80% would take the books if they are not going to use them. It was a very good question. Well, simplicity. If someone is still simple when he is a grown-up person, that's his merit. And I said, Anatoly, following the psychology of the society, if Anna takes this book to use it, Maria also should take this book, although she's not going to use it. So what we have to do, these smart people asked me, and I said, the book should be given to someone who will need it for his or her professional activity, to a librarian. A librarian takes a new book and he will read it before putting it on a shelf. He will leaf through it. So they said, okay, do it your own way. And I started moving around myself personally, transporting these books to libraries. And then I invented a competition. There are school librarians among you. I will present this book to you, and you tell your librarians, go to my site. There is information about Gaidar Award. Librarians actually, they were quite passive, and I invented this kind of award, although I know lots of librarians. And actually they sent to me their nominations. I was unable to understand what they really mean in Russian. It's impossible to understand meaning that their bosses untaught them to write in Russian language. They use bureaucratic language, that's it. And then I prepared the text myself. A librarian works with a teacher and with a school boy or a girl, and I sent it to them. And actually they paid great compliments to me. They said, oh, it's so clear. And I said to myself, yes, I still know my Russian. We've been trying to invite people from afar. And I said, if, there are people of the same capacity and same quality, let us give preference to people from afar. For instance, there was a girl from Buryatia, and she called me and said, probably you would not be able to invite me because we are far away. Ulan-Ude, it's only 8 hours by bus to the nearest airport. But we invited her. And she came. And then she said, it's very expensive. You shall not be able to invite us. And she said, do you really need this? Because we are orphans. We are orphans socially. Yes, she worked with her brother in a library, and they are both orphans. I wrote a very good work which was called Shock Treatments. I said, are you orphans? But she's 24 only. And he said, father committed suicide in 1998 and mother committed suicide in 2003. Actually, I didn't know what to say. Imagine how desperate you should be. You leave your own children when they're just 5 years of age. And at that moment, I said, we shall invite you for sure, because you have your own country. That's what I said, unexpectedly for myself. And then she called me from Ulan-Ude. The air ticket went more expensive, for 5,000 rubles. And I said, okay, take your ticket only one way, and we shall pay back to you. Your return ticket, we'll buy it here. And And I divided this information with Chubai's deputy, Urinson, and I told him I don't know where to take 50,000 rubles for a return ticket for these people. And next day, actually, they found 50,000 rubles for me because they know that I would not ask such favors without a reason. Now, I have mentioned Igor Gaidar already. What is important for you if you want to buy it? Much cheaper than in a bookshop. I bought it myself at the publishing house on Friday. Cheaper. It is for adolescents about the Soviet time, and it is written in a very clear way. And when people tell me, if this is obvious, I say, obvious to whom? Because young people now, they do not believe that we lived without Xeroxes and without mobile phones. They can't imagine it, adolescents of nowadays. Then I brought in several books by Chudakov, the best Russian novel of the 21st century. That's 9 publications within the 3 years. And this is novel, but Alexander has lots of interesting realias. They say this book is very optimistic. That's the war and post-war years, but pretty optimistic. Because it's about people, how they somehow went through it. Lots of real stuff. And there is a story of a sailor, and he tells him the story about Varyak, which did not drown, as a matter of fact. They were saved. They moved to some other foreign ships. And that was the story of Varyak. This is the book that is liked by parents, although it is criticized in the internet, especially by women. Women criticize me, by the way. I don't know what's so bad about this book. I just tell you what you have to read before you reach 16. I write that I have 2 laws. The first 2 laws. There are no books which is too early to read them, although there are books which should not be read at all. Because pretty often it happens that you open a book and you think that that's too early for you, and then you just close it down. There was another piece of news for me, what you shouldn't read before 12. If you don't know, just take care. Only after 12. You should read Dyumovochka and Pushkin's fairy tale about Tsar Sultan, not before 12. It's harmful. But when you are 14, nobody would read this Dyumovochka, which is the fairy tale by Andersen. Another book, I am proud of it, consisting of 3 parts: what to do about classics, what to do about verses, and what to do about the Russian language. And I am explaining how you should teach the Russian language and literature nowadays. And I'm pretty sure that what I write in this book is right. Maybe some of you will require this book for your colleagues. That's my detective story for children. Actually, I like the history of literature and the history of the Soviet time, the right conceptual literature of the Soviet time, not by chapters, but just use the way the mechanism worked, because literature is really something special, because the art is always there and it pushes its way through. Even in the 70s, there were people who said, what you write about Khrushchev, what about Stalin? There were wonderful writers under Stalin, like Mandelstam, Bulgakov, Akhmatova, etc. I was once preparing a TV program about the Soviet time, about literature of the Soviet time, and well, I said a very simple thing. Everybody saw how a poplar goes through the asphalt, but that doesn't mean that the asphalt helps a poplar to go through. That is how the literature survives in the totalitarian time. I received a great compliment from a member of the Constitutional Court, Tamara Morshakova. You probably know her. She told me, Marietta, you are the only person in the country who deals with legal elucidation or education of adolescents. Of course, I sat for 7 years at the Commission for Pardon, and I went through all sorts of convictions. And people do not know, by the way, what the jury trial is about. And I hold quiz throughout the whole country, hold quizzes. I have a question. I say, what emperor in what year introduced the Great Reform and liberated peasants, and how did he die? So you should ask this question for everybody. Another question, what month the so-called Soviet power started? And when it ended? I witnessed the end of it myself, and you will never be able to see it. What your compatriots are, there were many philologists around. There were people who were strangers to me, but they were united by something. I came, although I knew that I might die by some random bullets, and we stood there, and that was the feeling of unity, enormous feeling of unity. And 2 days later, I was standing in front of an enormous door in the Central Committee of the Communist Party and looked at the 2 pieces of paper on the door, saying the best words I read in my life: Central Committee of the Communist Party is closed down. So this book is about right and the story of Holocaust, by the way. A boy in Altaisk makes his own museum of Professor Wallenberg. Well, young people, they don't know the name of Raoul Wallenberg. And young people come to me for special course. Nobody knows the name of Raoul Wallenberg in this country. And I wanted this particular part to be interesting, and it's a story within a story. And Raoul Wallenberg meets Eichmann, and this really happened, and it was the end of 1944, and they said that Germany is losing the war, but Eichmann said not the war with Jews. And Eichmann said Jews are not people, and Wallenberg said no, I have a different opinion. And anyway, you know that he saved about 100,000 Jews by individual efforts. And actually, I wrote these chapters, and there is an exhibition in our Sakharov Center. One is a one is a hero. Well, we have no time for questions, and this is the magic of Marietta Chudakova, because you have to listen to her, and you see it and you understand why it is so. You have to listen to what we have just listened. And obviously in the program there is only one session of 2 hours, and that is why, because we thought that it is very important to raise, to set the tone, and we thank Marietta Amarovna for her important milestones or cornerstones of the Russian history, for her stresses from the civic point of view, and also people do not understand properly the terms of civil culture, civic society. This is the field of manipulation, and Marietta Chudakova's books explain these manipulations away. Marietta spoke with us in March about literature. This time she told us about lessons of history. You are kindly come to us again, and now we can buy books. This program has nothing to do with the school program. This is just the initiative of the author, so you can buy the books, and there is someone who will help you if you are interested. Thank you very much. Actually, I did not tell you much, but you can write to me. I have my electronic address, marietta.com Chudakova at and then gmail.com. It's like in case of everybody. We have a coffee break now. Can people talk to you? Yes, of course, you can talk to me and you can discuss things with me.